Welcome to your broker admin, where we dive into the latest review outcomes, share practical tips in our Humpday helpers, and feature special industry guest interviews to help you stay on top of the game. Whether you're flying solo or part of a team, we're here to help you streamline your processes and work smarter, not harder.
Well, time for this week's episode of Your Broker Admin. Before we kick off episode 80 though, here's this week's bonus history bite. On this day in history, July the 15th gives us the end of the Little General and the beginnings of a major aviation company. In 1815, Napoleon surrenders to Captain Frederick Maitland of HMS Bellerophon at Rochefort after his earlier defeat at the Battle of Waterloo. Napoleon had declared himself French Emperor in 1804 and achieved great military success, ruling much of Europe before his decision to invade Russia in 1812 changed everything. Not a great move, as it turns out. Despite his eventual downfall, Napoleon's influence extended far beyond the battlefield, with the Napoleonic Code still shaping legal systems around the world today. And in 1916, American lumber industrialist William E. Boeing founded the Pacific Aero Products Company in Seattle, which was renamed Boeing Airplane Company the following year. The company went on to become one of the world's largest aviation manufacturers, building aircraft and operating airlines until regulations in 1934 forced those two sides of the business to separate. Then coincidentally, on the same date in 1954, the first commercial jet transport plane built in the United States was tested, which happened to be a Boeing 707, another major leap forward for air travel. Moving on to the present day, this week on YBA, we'll kick things off with the reviews wrap-up, covering the week the 10th of July 2026, with plenty happening across all fronts. Then we'll move on to this week's Humpday Helper, where I pose more questions than answers around the recently released AML CTF Act changes and retention of photo ID documents. I'm Rob Cummings. Thanks for tuning in to Your Broker Admin, and let's get the show up and away as we have a lot to unpack this week. In this week's reviews wrap-up, we're looking at the outcomes from loan reviews completed during the week ending the 10th of July 2026. It was another solid week of activity with 8 reviews delivering rate reductions, generating total interest savings of around $5,900. The rate reductions were nicely spread this week, ranging from the more common 0.05% reductions through to a much larger 0.7% reduction, with savings ranging anywhere from around $300 up to $1,450. There was also a good mix of lenders involved, with 6 different lenders featuring across the successful reviews. We received an interesting response from an ANZ BDM this week when querying a no change outcome on a standard investment loan scenario, even after an escalation, where the rate was clearly too high. The response was that existing customers' lending is often 15 to 20 points worse off than new-to-bank customers. Doesn't say a lot for being a loyal customer of ANZ, but at least they managed to secure a 0.05% reduction for the borrower in the end. Now for this week's outcome of the week, just to contradict my comments from last week, CBA have come up with this week's best savings outcome. Again, a rate reduction of 0.15%, generating an interest saving of $1,450. The good news was that the end rate was actually quite reasonable as well, finishing at 6.14%. For what it's worth, they also managed the second best result for the week of $1,130 from a 0.31% rate reduction. The starting rate of 6.5 for an OO loan was pretty average, but we gather it was because the loan started in LMI territory, and as a result of the property value increasing, it's now sub 80%. And the new opportunities? The 3 lending opportunities uncovered this week from our client conversations were all quite different. The first was an internal refinance of around $600,000 following a disappointing review outcome with ANZ. Need I say more? The second was a purchase of an upgraded property with borrowing requirements of around $850,000. They were also looking to keep their existing property as a rental. And the third was a straightforward investment property purchase with funding requirement of around $650,000 using available equity from an existing property. And on to this week's client conversations. The first conversation this week was with a NAB client who has a couple of home loans that only settled last year when they purchased their holiday apartment. The rate review didn't result in any reduction, but the rate was still reasonable for NAB at 6.23%. When we spoke with the client, the conversation was less about the rate and more about what's happening in their world. The tenants have moved out of the holiday apartment, so they're now spending most weekends down on the coast enjoying it themselves. The wife has also recently left her job and is currently looking for a new role. They're comfortable with NAB and the setup is working well for them. Looking ahead, they're considering their next move, potentially purchasing another property with some acreage and possibly retaining the 2 existing properties as rentals. A lot will depend on what happens with the job situation and where the property market heads over the next 6 to 12 months. There wasn't anything to do immediately, but it was a useful conversation and we've kept the broker updated so they're aware of where things are at. The second conversation was with a client who works in private health and has their home loan through Macquarie. The loan settled 3 years ago when they purchased their current property, and the property has increased significantly in value since then. We completed the rate review with Macquarie, but there wasn't much surprise when no reduction was offered. The rate was already sitting at 6.04%, which was already below their current market offering. When we spoke with the client, they were happy with the outcome and happy with Macquarie generally. The interesting part of the conversation was around the increase in property value and whether they had any plans for the additional equity. They were aware of the increase and actually appreciated the question because, yes, they did have plans. They wanted to explore purchasing an investment property using the equity in their current home. We offered to have the broker reach out, which they were very keen on. In fact, they wanted to get the conversation moving quickly and asked for the broker to contact them the following day while they were still off work. So that conversation was arranged, and what started as a simple review check-in has potentially opened up a new lending opportunity. And in summary, another week where the reviews delivered more than just rate reductions. Some opportunities start with a conversation, sit in the background for a while, and develop when the timing is right. Others are much simpler. The second conversation this week is probably the best example of why these reviews matter. The client already had the idea, the equity was there, and the willingness to explore it was also there. The opportunity was sitting there waiting to be picked. The only question was whether it was going to be picked by us or someone else. We just had to ask. And that's really where the value of the review process continues to show up. This week's Humpday Helper number 182 is a little different. It's less of a policy update and more of an observation and conversation starter around changes to AML, CTF obligations for current reporting entities that came into effect from the 31st of March 2026, which may affect how personal information is handled. This includes those which are small businesses with an annual turnover of less than $3 million. I first became aware of these changes a couple of weeks ago after AFG sent out a communication to its broker network instructing brokers to remove or destroy copies of photo ID documents collected after the 31st of March 2026 and held within Flex or Broker Engine following settlement, or if an application is declined or withdrawn. It doesn't specifically mention an individual broker's document storage, for example, OneDrive or Google Drive, but it is inferred. At the time of recording, Loan Market and Connective are yet to issue similar communications to their broker networks, so AFG appears to have moved early on this one. OAIC, which is the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner, have released some guides on the changes which are available on their website. The link is available in the show notes. Reading through the OAIC guidelines raised a few questions for me that I don't yet have answers to. For example, the guide says reporting entities must have a privacy policy. Does that sit at the aggregator level, or should every individual broker have one? It also talks about taking reasonable steps when information is disclosed to overseas service providers. But what exactly are reasonable steps, and who is responsible for taking them? Another part says photo ID documents should be destroyed once they're no longer needed. But what actually defines needed? The final point that really caught my attention relates to existing client files. The guide states that copies of identification documents collected prior to the 31st of March 2026 are records for the purposes of the AML CTF Act, and reporting entities can continue to retain these for 7 years following the end of the business relationship or 7 years after the date of the last occasional transaction. So, if you have an active client relationship that commenced before the 31st of March 2026, is it possible that an ID document collected before that date could effectively be retained for up to 10 years? This is one of those changes where I think there are probably more questions than answers at the moment. It would be good to get some further clarification, but I'd also be interested to hear how others are interpreting it. What are your thoughts?
Thanks for listening to Your Broker Admin. If you've got feedback, questions, or a topic you'd like covered on the show, you can now send it through via our Contact the Show page. The link is in the episode notes. If the link's not clickable in your player, just copy it from the show notes or head to the episode description on your phone. A rating on Apple Podcasts, a review on Podchaser, or a follow on Spotify all help the show reach the people it's built for. This has been Your Broker Admin, for those who like their process neat.